Hello and welcome to the Criterion 40. We are a Create Context podcast. You can head over to create-context.com for more film reviews and analysis. Each week we look at a different film in Criterion's 40th anniversary collection. This week we are looking at the film All That Jazz. By the time All That Jazz released in 1979, Bob Fosse was already a legend in the film and music industry. He had made a name for himself acting and dancing in Hollywood musicals, winning Tony Awards for his stage performances, and even directing the Oscar-winning film Cabaret in 1972. For Fosse's greatest picture, though, he decided to turn the camera inward and instead of showing a stage play, let the audience see the toll his stardom had taken on his personal life. All That Jazz is not a direct autobiographical film, but much like Fellini's 8.5, a lot of liberties are taken in order to make a better final product. Both films are more about the broad strokes of a story than a faithful retelling of facts, but the heart and soul of Fosse are front and center in All That Jazz, and the director decides that instead of entertaining, maybe he should be reflective. All That Jazz is a musical in the literal sense, but it is smaller and contained than the musical films Fosse was best known for. In this film, Roy Schneider stars as Joe Gideon, a director pulling double duty, editing a film and working to launch a new play. It purposely mirrors a time in Fosse's life when he edited his Lenny Bruce film while simultaneously working on his Tony Award-winning production, Chicago. Amongst the barrage of professional duties, Gideon has a tumultuous personal life. He's a womanizer, a girl dad to a preteen, and an addict. He's rarely seen on screen without a cigarette in his mouth and a drink in his hand. He works hard and lives harder, starting and ending every day with a cocktail of pills and booze to get him through. This pressure eventually builds up too much, and Gideon is eventually hospitalized with heart problems, a serious ailment that Joe brushes off as effortlessly as everything else in his life. Aside from Schneider, Jessica Lange is the second top-billed performer. Lange plays a mysterious woman all dressed in white who only appears in Joe Gideon's strange hallucinations. Though her screen presence is minimal, her aura is present throughout the entire film. We never quite know who she is or what she is, but we, like Joe, always feel her throughout the film. She asks Joe questions about his life, his lovers, and his career. She wants to know the things he's proud of and the things that have brought him shame. Joe is also painfully honest with this woman in white, a trait seemingly reserved for only her. By the end of the film, we know exactly who this woman is. She is the angel of death, sent to transition Joe into whatever afterlife awaits. Through this character played by the beautiful Lange, we learn more about Joe and in turn about director Bob Fosse. This framing device does a great job of laying out the major themes present in All That Jazz, mainly death. However, it also allows the director to be more vulnerable in this film than most. Fosse wouldn't pass away for another 8 years, but in many ways, All That Jazz feels like a deathbed confessional. The best art is a direct representation of the artist themselves. When done well, we are able to see the artist's fingerprints all over their work, yet still find something in the work that resonates with us personally. Fosse manages this brilliantly in All That Jazz, giving us, the audience, a peek into his darkest times when he was staring down death, and allows us to commiserate with him. Death is something we all fear, and it is always inevitable. Even though Joe Gideon appears entirely nonchalant about death throughout the film, his fear rises the closer it becomes. He's not just afraid of being gone and the unforeseen future that awaits him. He's fearful of all he's leaving behind and all he's leaving unfinished. Outside of his work in this film and Cabaret, Fosse is probably best known for his stage play Chicago. A song from Chicago is literally used as the title for this film. This musical was eventually turned into a movie directed by Rob Marshall. Rob Marshall's Chicago is not one of my favorite films, but it was a smash sensation upon its release. It won Oscars, catapulted careers for up-and-coming actors, and revitalized what a musical film would be. It's also a film that feels outrageously removed from the directorial work of Bob Fosse. Bob Fosse is known not just for his direction, but really more for his choreography. His dance routines are probably his greatest contribution to the art, second only to his cinematography of these dance numbers. Cabaret, his 1972 film, is a perfect example of this. He places the camera on the stage with the actors. As an audience watching the film, we feel like we are a part of the performance, not just witnessing the spectacle. You can see here how the camera is placed under a chair, where it feels like we're not out in the audience, that we're sitting on stage with the performers. All That Jazz is a film in many ways about work left unfinished, and it's impossible to not watch this film and think what a Bob Fosse Chicago film would look like. For all the big scenes and huge numbers in Chicago and Fosse's other work, All That Jazz is relatively contained. The only big musical numbers really come at the end of the film and the end of the film's hero, Joe Gideon's life. Joe takes center stage in a hospital bed in a dreamlike sequence, watching his greatest and worst moments play out in front of him, until finally the mic is given over to him and he sings his big finale, Bye Bye Life, to an adoring crowd. Gideon wants to die the way he lived, surrounded by praise and adoration. Instead, when the camera leaves this dream, we see his true end, a lonely death in a hospital room. And that is his true fear, not just leaving work left unfinished, but leaving this earth the same way we all do, with no pomp and no circumstance. All That Jazz is a film that taps into our deepest, darkest fears, and it does so on the biggest stage with tons of cheering fans before bursting our bubble and sending us back to reality. Joe Gideon has lived his life fast and hard. He's buried himself in his work, self-medicates to keep up this fast-paced cadence, and never allows anyone, even his multiple lovers, to get close to knowing the true man. Gideon may not even know himself. It's only when faced with death, the circumstance and the physical manifestation played by Jessica Lange, that he truly learns who he is, and he doesn't like it. All That Jazz is a sad movie, but there's a real juxtaposition between the regret and the film that we're seeing. The film starts with rehearsal practices. Everything is raw, underperformed. The actors and actresses, they're all wearing sweats. No one is in the audience. But at the end, when Gideon is dying, the film moves into these big spectacle song and dance numbers. The film tricks us by hiding the pain and fear of death behind beautiful sets, fantastic dance numbers, and catchy tunes. A trick Bob Fosse used his whole life. All That Jazz isn't just autobiographical because it closely resembles Fosse's life, but because Joe Gideon plays the same tricks on the audience Fosse has been playing for years. Behind the spectacle is a sadness. And for 2 hours, Fosse let us look behind this spectacle and in turn made his greatest film. If you're interested in All That Jazz, maybe want to check out something similar, I would just recommend looking at some of Fosse's other work, notably his Oscar-winning film Cabaret. This film won him an Academy Award for Best Directing, as well as awards for Liza Minnelli as Best Actress, on top of a slew of below-the-line wins: cinematography, art direction, editing, scoring. This film is a masterpiece and one of the best true musicals ever made. Next, I check out Star 80. This is Fosse's last film and one of his worst reviews, but I actually liked it quite a bit. This film stars Marielle Hemingway as Dorothy Stratton, a Playboy playmate who was murdered by her boyfriend/manager, Paul Snider, who's played in the film by Eric Roberts. This film is a true story. Dorothy Stratton was a real Playboy bunny who died in 1980, and I believe the film suffers a bit from this fact. Eric Roberts as Snider is diabolical the entire film because this is a true story and he's playing a truly manipulative, evil man who took this young woman's life. The film has no sympathy for him, and it also portrays Stratton in this overly angelic way. This movie came out in 1983, only a mere 3 years after her death. I believe Fosse was overly sensitive to the nature of this crime. The result is a film that plays it very straight with its villains and heroes, and there is almost no nuance to the characters they are playing. That being said, though, the performances in the film, specifically Marielle Hemingway as Dorothy Stratton, are quite good, and Fosse is still an incredible filmmaker, even when his film is not knocking it out of the park. Thank you guys so much for watching the Criterion 40. We will be back next Tuesday with the film Bicycle Thieves, and I will see you then. The Criterion 40 is a Create Context podcast. Head over to createcontext.com for more film, reviews, and analysis. Our theme song is Hindsight by Shiloh, provided by the Riot Games Creator Save playlist. We drop new episodes every Tuesday at 8 a.m.